And the extent of my interview for that position really was, have you ever used a camcorder before? I said, yeah. And great, you're hired. When I came to SUNY Brockport, I was getting these questions from people like, you know, my dad is about to buy a Panasonic X3 942A, but we were concerned about the candle power, and we were wondering whether maybe we should be getting the other model, and which one's prettier? I didn't really know. But when you're given a label, you automatically become an expert on some material that you may not necessarily be. And there are a lot of different choices and ways to approach it. You can just fake it, and hopefully you'll learn enough as you go along to continue to fake it, and someday you'll turn around and find yourself quote-unquote expert. I've decided that rather than do that, I would debunk myself right from the start. I don't presume to be an expert on the prepared piano. And I don't presume to be an expert on John Cage, especially with the people that I have here before me, because through the course of this conference, almost, I would say, at least a dozen people have come up to me to share in intimate detail about John Cage. And I'm very jealous of the chances that all of you have had to meet this person. What I liked most was the fact that all your stories begin the same way. They begin with, oh, you know, there was a time when John Cage and Merce Cunningham came to our city and they did a concert and all stuff. But at this great party afterwards, John Cage was there, he's in a corner, and he was drinking a beer and stuff like that. I heard variations on the theme from everybody, not just here, but back. I've heard about poker games that lasted 5 hours. I've heard about, told me about a chess game where John Cage was involved with a huge chess board playing chess at this party, and he didn't really want to talk to anybody. And it's not my story, but it's a wonderful story where all these people went, that's John Cage, I'm going to go talk to John Cage. And they'd all stand there and he'd say, get me a beer. And they go, oh, anything for John Cage. And I go get a beer, get him his beer, and he still wouldn't talk to them. It has been, I guess what I'm going to talk about are my experiences using the prepared piano, and hopefully inviting some discussion and advice from all of you, because I know that all of you already know what it is. This isn't a Tupperware party where I'm going, and you too can have prepared piano in your own living room. And you already know this. You use it, you've had ideas that I've never had. So I'm really going to make this a very personal discussion about the experiences I've had using it, the bad experiences and the good experiences. And in a sense, to do a tribute to somebody like John Cage is really impossible. I can only make a tribute to John Cage insofar as my personal relationship to John Cage, or his thoughts is a better way to look at it. So I can talk about that. And I can do it with very sincere respect and awe, even, as I discovered more and more about this individual. And I'll just talk about that. The reason I wanted to make it a disclaimer is because I would be flattered, and I'll probably go along with it if people say, I wanted your advice on some John Cage or something like that, or on the prepared piano. But I'm going to say right off the bat that there are other people who have just equally valid advice, and there's a lot of learning. I did spend a lot of time assembling material. I seized the advantage. The original format, I should start with this, of this whole presentation was on the prepared piano, period. With the death of John Cage last fall, and I talked to Natalie about it, we thought it would be nice to focus on John Cage's relationship to dance through the prepared piano, which is very significant. And it also allowed me a chance to really focus my ideas and thoughts. I was going to try to find every single published prepared piano piece I could, give you all lists and stuff like that. And I'd already had a doctoral dissertation, so I didn't really need another one. And I appreciated the chance to limit my thoughts. Okay. The opening page here is just simply, this is the prepared piano instructions for the sonatas and the interludes for the prepared piano. The average time from people who have performed some of these, Greg has performed some of these. I've played them privately, I've never performed them. Steve Rush played them all. Is about 2.5 hours of preparation on the instrument. And when you get the preparations out of the instrument, you're going to have to retune, probably rebuild the instrument. It has a very significant impact on the instrument.
Anybody but
Mm-hmm. Yes, this is erase that part of it. Okay. And I thought a nice little, to make a frontispiece, there was a wonderful photograph in a book I'm going to talk about presently of John Cage preparing the piano. I love the earnestness on his face. And I think it's important to see that because he took what he was doing very seriously in his own inimitable style. There are quotes in this typeface throughout the handout. All of these quotes are from his essay, How the Piano Came to be Prepared, which is a wonderful little essay. It originally appeared as the introduction to a book called The Well-Prepared Piano, which is sort of a Bible or a self-help book on the prepared piano. And then he rewrote it and republished it in this book here, Empty Words, and it appears as a brief essay here. Okay. And it's very quotable, and I used it to outline my presentation, just some of the thoughts that came out of this. And my favorite one is obviously the head of the whole paper here. I decided that what was wrong was not me, but the piano. I decided to change it. And he certainly did. One very interesting thing about studying a musician, or somebody in the arts, or anybody really, is that the person themselves is not always the best resource of information. And when I say best, it depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for insights into how someone thinks and their attitudes, it's very important to read their writing. But if you need some information, sometimes there can be a practice of changing one's own history. The best example of this is Igor Stravinsky, another person who had something to do with dance in the music field. And he is regarded as the worst resource on information about Igor Stravinsky because I think out of his own sense of humor, he loved to reinvent himself. And his relationship with Robert Kraft was very strange, and a lot of it was filtered through Robert Kraft. So when you want to find out about what Stravinsky was doing, things like that, read Stravinsky, and read Stravinsky, there's a lot in print reportedly of what Stravinsky's saying. But please, read it with a grain of salt.
Oh, a pound.
I beg your pardon?
A pound.
Yeah, a pound of salt is very good advice in Stravinsky's case. Now, in John Cage's case, there is some of that to consider. I think that this essay, taken on its own about how the piano came to be prepared, is somewhat misleading. Because it pretty much says that, there's this one afternoon, I had to come up with a dance piece, boom, it hit me. I'll put stuff in the piano, new idea. But there's clearly he was certainly intellectually prepared for this sort of leap of faith a lot earlier than that and through a lot of different resources. So I consider taking John Cage's words as a grain of salt. The other thing I find that's very interesting about John Cage, reading his words, reading his books, this is most famous one, probably being Silent, didn't help me learn more about what John Cage did, but it taught me about who he was. But I also thought the thing I got out of reading John Cage's writings was it made me think about music and about art and about time in ways that I never had before. So Silence was very mind-opening to me, but didn't help me prepare this presentation. So I have some other resources that I've given you a little bibliography of, so if you're curious about any of this stuff. Okay. The reason I wanted to do this presentation is really solely for selfish reasons. I love these conferences. I love just being with all of you people because you're so generous. And what I get mostly from it is hearing other people do stuff and saying, that's a great idea, I'm going to steal it right away. And I think we're all proud of our gifts of thievery. And I am openly admitting that I'm hoping to get some great ideas from you today in this discussion. And so I really don't, again, I'm going back to the point, I don't purport to be an expert. I've done some things, and I'll show you what I've done, but I want to hear what you've done, because there's a limitless amount of ideas to be gained here. And I'll get to that portion pretty soon. Okay. Briefly, the role of the prepared piano, I think, is pretty clear in terms of its relationship to dance. It really came to the forefront because of what John Cage was doing, and it was used initially by John Cage, at least in a published way, or an official way, or as official as you can get, with choreography in mind. It was music for choreography. Okay, for us in a dance class, when you just can't stand either the instrument that you've been playing for the last 6 months or the music that you've been playing for the last 6 months, it offers you a sudden and very refreshing timbral change. But it also offers the dancer a sudden and refreshing timbral change. And it's quite crucial, and crucial to your own mental health, crucial to expanding people's ears. And it's very true to the philosophies that John Cage espouses that no sound is amusical. And that there's an infinity of sound, and it's all right there at your fingertips. Please use it. I have come up with very definite opinions about how the prepared piano works in class and how it doesn't work. And, but first thing first is you need to use it. One of the things that I like about it, in terms of sounds, is that it's cheap. And that seems to have been a recurrent theme this weekend about how do we do this stuff on no budget. I love, what you do is so wonderful because I don't have to have the instruments there. I don't have to go get them. They have the instruments right there. I find that when I'm preparing a piano, I'm just looking around to see what's in the dancer's bag that was left at my foot. And I just throw it in there. And I take it right out when it's not terrible. But I had another experience that really made me start focusing on prepared piano all the more. For those of you who were at last year's conference up in SUNY Brockport, there's another musician at the Brockport faculty who I think is a wonderful musician. His name's Greg Ketchum. He's a percussionist. And he's very wonderful to talk to. He's very mind-opening. I loved talking to him. I loved hearing his ideas. And we've had the luxury at Brockport of being able to play together. It's really fun to work with another musician in a dance class. You all know that and have great experiences. Sometimes you have a terrible experience with that too, but that's all part of the learning process. Working with Greg in class is a treat, but spoiling for pianists because he's so accommodating to the pianist that he starts to support you all the time. So you start doing, your fake jazz, like he'll just start going in the swing, and he's really comfortable with that, and he does it really well. He does it so well that you can forget that he's there and collaborating with somebody. And I've talked to him about it, and I said, and I'll just say, why don't you start, I'll join you. And we're like, okay, and then as soon as I join in, he just listens to what I do. He's such a good listener, and I think that's something that he's working on himself. However, it occurred to me a way to meet him halfway was to prepare the piano and take out the harmonic, melodic elements of the piano. And it really opened up a new world of possibilities, and I was able to learn a lot more from my colleague. And that was when I really decided I would always be prepared, to be a prepared pianist. And I always have that little bag full of goodies.
You get stopped in airports.
No, I actually sent it through the luggage this time. And a little pile of screws sometimes will set off the radar detector. Okay. Now, my relationship with John Cage was such that as a graduate student in a school of music, you are paranoid of being caught with your pants down. In other words, at all those pseudo-intellectual and intellectual discussions that happen over meals and tables, some name comes up, you want to be prepared with some info bit where you can, oh yes, he did that, and then, okay, I'm covered. And you can just back off and let the other experts talk. And it's really tough sometimes in a music school. I always had struggled with this. And so I accumulated the knowledge that A, he threw stuff in the piano, B, he threw dice and figured out pieces that way, and C, he knew a lot about mushrooms. And that got me through most of the discussions of John Cage. And I'm very ashamed to admit all this to you, but that's the truth. I'm finishing a PhD in music theory at Eastman School of Music, which I am very proud of. There has been no room in the curriculum that I've studied for a very, very long time for the ideas of a person like John Cage, which I think is tragic. And it took a project like doing this here today for me to begin to understand and gain from a person I should have been gaining from years ago. So in a sense, it's a very real tribute to him from my personal point of view, because it's been a thrill to look and discover this information. And it certainly hasn't been about agreeing with everything he said. He says some things in print that will infuriate you. One of my favorite essays, it's a beautiful essay, is called In Defense of Satie. And in it, he just comes out with, and Beethoven had to make a choice about form, and he made the wrong one. Everything he does is wrong. And it's just, wait a minute, I like this music. But then I realized I was getting passionate about these things because of the way he said things and because of who he was and how he came across. And I think, I don't know, but I feel that he felt it was part of his role. But he certainly brought that out in me. So in this sense, it's also a tribute to John Cage. Now, some of the things that I discovered as I learned more about the early background of John Cage, there were some very interesting things. He was born in, I think it was 1912, in Los Angeles, California. Traveled around the country a bit. Graduated from Los Angeles High School with the highest grade point average anybody ever had. And to this day, I think that he still holds that record for Los Angeles High School. So he was certainly a brilliant mind from the start. Made it through about a year and a semester at Pomona College. And was increasingly disinterested. Traveled throughout Europe. Came back to Southern California and earned a living giving lectures on modern art to housewives and househelp and whoever, people who had time on their hands and cash. So even at this point, he says in writing that, I would make sure I looked at the painting the day before, anyways, and then I would just go in and talk about this other stuff. And sometimes I feel when I'm giving a lecture that I really can relate to that approach. I'm a day ahead of my students when I'm doing this material. But even at this time, he's already begun to compose, and one of the things that John Cage states, and is clear in what's little extent of the music from this time, is that he's very fascinated and loves numbers. And he loves ratios, and he loves the beauty of relationships between numbers. And he worked out several pieces very abstractly with just number ratios in mind, with completely disregarding, the typical compositional styles of the times. He then, I won't go into extensive detail, the people he studied with, though, and this is where the whole point about, one day I went into a room and suddenly I had a prepared piano is a little misleading. People he studied with prepared him in certain ways for this. I was fascinated to learn, and embarrassed to admit that I didn't know, that he had studied with Arnold Schoenberg. And
You didn't know that?
no, I didn't, but I do now. And I've tried to vet my way. And Arnold Schoenberg at one point said that, you're very creative, but you'll never really make it because you have absolutely no understanding of Western harmony. And, hot John Cage must have said. But he also studied with Henry Cowell, who I think was a much bigger influence. There was a movement in the 1920s, especially, that really started to gain momentum, establishing an American voice in modern music. Where was America going artistically? And one of its real leaders was Henry Cowell. And we probably have encountered in 7th grade music appreciation a piece called The Banshee, where one pianist actually just stands there and holds the pedal down. And there are recordings of Cowell playing where he's just been like this. And it's quite extraordinary. Cowell introduced Cage to the idea of using what we call the straight piano, in other words, playing inside the piano. That's where he gained these ideas. He was also introduced to the music of Charles Ives, who, Charles Ives already achieved this legendary status, and part of the legend, like the legend of Paul Bunyan or Abe Lincoln, all this stuff, is that, he wrote all this stuff on the train while selling insurance in New York, and nobody ever heard or noted it until many, many years later, which is not true. The same legend applies to Bach. Everybody thinks that until Mendelssohn found them wrapping old fish in Bach manuscripts in a church in Leipzig, that no one had ever heard a piece of this. And this is how music history gets taught sometimes. The other conversation was very interesting to me because I'm thinking of other things that, just for the ease of speed of getting information out, you oversimplify and can ruin some really important points in musical history. Beethoven was trained on the left-handed clavier. So these are myths. People knew Ives' music. One of the pieces that had an impact on John Cage was the music for two pianos tuned a quarter tone apart. Okay, so here we have two elements introduced. That the piano generates sound not only by pushing a key, but by striking it, it's a resonating body. It's built to resonate, to generate sound. And that we have a whole other universe opened up by the retuning of an instrument, or the changing of tuning. Because once you tune pianos a quarter tone apart, technically speaking, the whole backbone of Western harmony really takes a back seat to some other interesting relationships that you haven't had before. The other theorist that, and musician that John Cage was introduced to is Ferruccio Busoni's ideas. And Ferruccio Busoni is really one of the true futurists of Europe, who believed many things, and he reinvented notation several different times in several different ways. He felt the piano was inadequate and needed to be modernized in many different ways. And what it could do, you should be able to build instruments where the keys not only went up and down, but back and forth, in and out, to the sides. He revolutionized the way the piano was thought of, although he remained within the confines of the instrument through most of his work. His theoretical writings talk about this, and his proposals for alternate ways of notation. And that is what was crucial. He discovered that, the whole idea of notation is fairly arbitrary, and so steeped in tradition it begins to stink after a while. And you see all these influences converging in what happens in John Cage's ideas. So that, I think, is some, in brief and oversimplified, which I just criticized other people for doing, ideas about where John Cage's background comes in. The one I want to come back to is the number relationships. Because I want you to think for a second, what happens to a piano once you prepare it? All those relationships, the meaning of a triad. Here's a nice minor triad. And it comes with 300 plus centuries, not centuries, years, 3 centuries plus of baggage. Minor triad, a root, maybe a predominant chord, all sorts of wonderful things. You can use conventional notation, but when you play this minor triad, all right, suddenly those relationships are meaningless. To compose music based on harmonic relationships for a prepared piano is irrelevant. So he returns to something that he already has been using and is really his own. He returns to number ratios. And in a sense, they're pieces where he is fascinated, even at this time, by structure as based on rhythm, or derived from rhythm. In his essay in defense of Satie, written in the 30s, he talks about that the decision that Beethoven made was wrong was basing form and structure on harmony rather than on the juxtaposition of sound and silence, which he thinks is much more primal and much more principal to the spirit of music and where you should really look. And he cites Satie and Anton Webern as the people who do understand this. And it's very interesting comments he makes on this subject. The other influence that takes effect on him about time, duration, phrasing, and number relationships is the fact that now he's also earning a living as an accompanist for a dance school in Seattle, Washington. He's playing for the Cornish School in Seattle, where he meets, among other people, Merce Cunningham and Sybil Ford. So he's accompanying classes, and they start asking him for scores. And so he's building his scores, sometimes very arbitrarily on, okay, how many counts, numbers of phrases. But because of my impression, and this is strictly my impression, and is that I think that was very well suited to Cage's character in intellectually what he was interested in anyways, and he began to explore this. So the first published piece by Cage, that's a prepared piano piece, or the first official piece, I'll go back to that term, is a piece called Bacchanal for Sybil Ford. Okay, and I'll read the very opening of how the piano was prepared. In the late 30s, I was employed as accompanist for the classes in modern dance at the Cornish School in Seattle, Washington. These classes were taught by Bonnie Berg, who had been a member of Martha Graham's company. Among her pupils was an extraordinary dancer named Sybil Ford, later an associate in New York City of Catherine Dunham. 3 or 4 days before she was to perform her Bacchanal, Sybil asked me to write music for it. I agreed. At that time, I had 2 ways of composing, for piano or orchestral instruments. I wrote 12-tone music. I had studied with Adolf Weiss and Arnold Schoenberg. I also wrote music for percussion ensembles. That's a whole other topic which I could spend talking about these extraordinary pieces for interesting, junkyard ensembles of percussion and true percussion instruments. Pieces for 3, 4, 6 players. The Cornish theater in which Sybil of Forth was to perform had no space in the wings. There was also no pit. There was, however, a piano at one side in front of the stage. I couldn't use percussion instruments for Sybil's dance, though, suggesting Africa, they would have been suitable. They would have left too little room for her to perform. I was obliged to write a piano piece. I spent a day or so conscientiously trying to find an African 12-tone row. I had no luck. If we had, it would have been extraordinary. I decided that what was wrong was not me, but the piano. I decided to change it. And from there, a legend was born. On your second page of your handout, I assembled, and I know this is an almost complete list, but not necessarily a complete list, because it's really hard to get a hold of everything. A list of significant pieces, anyways, that use prepared piano. Now, the first reaction was to go talk to people who probably know a lot about this. And at the Easton School is a man named David Burge, who is regarded as an expert on contemporary piano music. And I said, I need some advice originally on all prepared piano music. He goes, I don't know, I think the Cage stuff is the only good stuff. And that's all I really know. I don't know much about it. And then he just looks at me and he points his finger. And you better make a distinction between prepared piano and being inside the piano. There's a big difference there. So, okay. So I made a big distinction in my list here. Because I'm sure you're all thinking of scores that aren't on this list, where there's a lot of unusual and odd piano effects. But if there isn't garbage thrown inside there and touching those strings in unusual ways, then I didn't include it on the list. The list would have been going on forever. I think the biggest education I got about John Cage was preparing this list, because using a card, libraries for me, in spite of the fact that I've gotten as far as the dissertation, they're usually places to sleep. And I don't work well in them. There's always like this little hiss back here. You finally in the reading room or library, I'm out. I'm going, oh. So what I did was I went into the stacks. And among other things, they had assembled a complete collection of Cage works in 1964, most of which hadn't been stolen yet. And I pulled out piece by piece and just looked at it, looked at the instrumentation and what was going on. And it was just a wonderful process of discovery for me. I was able to look at all these tremendous scores of pieces I've heard of, from Fontana Mix to Water Music, which is a gorgeous score. I recommend anybody who ever has a chance to look at the score of Water Music. And it's a piece for piano, percussion, and a lot of bowls and goblets and things where you just keep pouring water from one piece to another piece. No? Yeah, smile for the photo. Okay. Now, there is a train of
Did you leave off sonatas and interludes for a reason?
Yeah, I forgot them.
Oh.
Sonatas and interludes. Well, you know why I forgot them? Because I put them on the front cover. They, of course, belong in this list. That's the most important piece, I think, in terms of our knowledge. Sonatas and interludes were 46 and 7. So I would put them after the 3 dances for 2 pianos. Okay, most of the music, not all of it, but most of the music that you see there, up to the sonatas and interludes, but not including the sonatas and interludes, is dance music. The sonatas and interludes were not written intentionally for the dance. Neither was the 34 minutes, 46.7, 76 second dance companion piece in 54. Those pieces are very fascinated with number ratios and are built specifically on time duration. So you really need to study the piece with a very accurate watch to learn how to perform it. And the concerto for prepared piano orchestra is almost taking a score to its logical conclusion as a set of instructions, and it's almost all instructions for the pianist. And there is a tremendous amount of leeway. He may have written other works after this. I didn't find any. And so again, I'm covering my butt here and saying an almost complete list of prepared piano page. Some of these scores, I really, after pulling them out and looking at them, I really want to know how they sound. And I know in my copious free time, I'm sure I will try to hear a couple of them. One of the most interesting to me was the Valentine out of season, music for Xenia to play. Xenia was his wife at the time, to play on a prepared piano, and it's a little Valentine on the cover of it. It's a small score, very simple to play. Okay, and now I also I wanted to give you some of the resources I was using to find out some of this information. Richard Bunger's book, The Well-Prepared Piano, is a very nice book. It talks a lot about all the different things you can do. It's very acknowledging of John Cage's influence. It's a very useful little book. I think it's out of print right now, and it was stolen from the Eastman Library. I can't speak too much about it, but this seems to be my life with the Eastman School of Music. Seems to be any book I would like to look at. It's been stolen a long time ago. And but David Burge did have a copy, so I did get a chance to look at it. John Cage's, that's where the essay can be found for how the piano can be prepared. Now the next work, I only began. My German is very weak. But this looks like it could be the most extraordinary investigation I've ever seen of this material by Monika Fürst-Heitmann, Das preparierte Klavier des John Cage. Okay, this piece does acoustical analysis of the way different types of materials change given the sound waves of a piano, how the timbres are changed. It really traces every aspect of prepared piano. It's a kind of extraordinary looking book. My favorite book of all of this was the Richard Castellanet's collection called John Cage from the series Documenting Monographs of Modern Art. I recommend it highly. Because it includes essays by John Cage, but it includes critical reaction to John Cage at the time, which is very interesting. You know, critics who had no clue what to make of this person. It had the when John Cage first came to New York and did a big percussion ensemble concert, it was written up in Life magazine, and it included the pictures in it. It was just fascinating. I learned so much about him from this book. And it was such a well-selected source of essays, so I really recommend that. A new book that just came out by David Nichols out of England. It took somebody from England to write a book on American experimental music. This is not happening here. This is a wonderful book, very theoretical, but very well presented. Discussion of Ives, Cowell, Ruth Crawford, and Charles Seeger, and the last chapters on John Cage, and it really gives you a real good sense of the music movement in the United States from 1910 to 1940, and obviously 1890, and going back to the early Charles Ives compositions. The Roaring Silence is a very new biography, just come out by David Revel. I've only had a chance to look at it, I haven't read it yet. The other book that I would have liked to have included on here, but also forgot, was Henry Cowell's book entitled New Musical Resources. It's a very important book, very enlightening about the state of music in the 1930s when he wrote it, and very useful today.
Is that the one where he talks about an undertone series?
Yeah, well, that's another agenda. Actually, that topic came up in my doctoral exams. Because the undertone series came out of Rameau in French theory in the late 18th century. Because he couldn't explain, he understood the relationship between tonic and dominant. Well, on this piano, it's something to do with it. Yes. But he couldn't explain to anybody the relationship of the subdominant to the tonic. So he invented an undertone series where if you hold a note down, you're actually generating partials or subpartials below the note, and that would explain subdominant. Except if you do that according to the math, you actually get a minor triad, not a major triad. So I kind of fudged it there. And it's been carried out by a lot of things. I think Henry Cowell's idea of it was much more in terms of just resonance in general, too. I don't know it well enough. I have to reread that. But yes, he does mention it. Okay, which brings me to...
Find the essay on in the Dance Society.
Oh, that's in the Castellanet's collection.
That's in silence, too.
Yes, it is. That's right.
It's in silence.
Yeah.
Okay, now, the piece I would like to play for you, I just thought I discovered, roaming through the stacks, just as part of this idea of making a tribute to John Cage, it would be nice to play a prepared piano piece for you. I selected this because it wasn't too hard, because it's quite beautiful, and the preparation is quite simple. And so I gave you, I guess I need to turn to page 3 then for my comments on this piece. Okay, this, along with the photo on the first page of the handout. He asked me to come to his studio and hear him play. I did. His preparation of the piano was so poor that I wished at the time that I had never written the music. Okay. That really, I didn't take this lightly. I followed his instructions as best I could, and I really had to think about the things that I was doing here. And bolt placement is crucial because in addition to playing keys, you're also inside plucking. And there's one little stretch, and I couldn't even figure it out at first how it's supposed to go, but you're supposed to pluck, because there are 3 strings, and a screw is between 2 of them. 2 of the strings are dampened.
Can we come and sit about now?
Sure. And so if you pluck either of the first 2 strings, you get that sound, but if you pluck the 3rd string, you get a completely different sound. And he wants you in moderately close proximity to pluck those 2 different sounds. He calls them one muted and the other open. So if I have the screw in the wrong place, and I get getting buzzes with my fingernails, and dampening the note before it was supposed to be dampened. So I actually had to really consider where to put the screw between which strings. And I had to be really careful to be consistent as well, because otherwise I would sometimes by accident pluck the wrong of the 3 strings, and so you have this camber that's all prepared, and all of a sudden you have a normal sound, and it sticks into you like a knife, and it really stands out. So this piece I have to take very seriously. Of course, it deserves to be taken seriously, but I think that sometimes preparing the piano scene people may have the attitude that it's sort of an easy way out, or it's sort of a joke thing not to be treated as music. And these comments are directed at you, but I haven't commented elsewhere. So by way of introduction, Richard Cameron Wolfe shared with me his introduction to John Cage that he got to give. Here's another person with wonderful anecdotes. I'm sure I'd love to hear what you have to say about John Cage. You probably know him very well. So I'd like to read this to you. Its duration is a minute, and I haven't had a chance to practice it, so I might screw up on the duration. That's okay. Okay. All right. So I will play this piece for you. It's in 2 movements. Okay, to introduce John Cage. It's time. How much time do I have? How much time do I have here? How much time do I have to hear? How much time do I hear? It's time for John Cage. John, joy of hearing nothing. Cage, caring after great emptiness. Time is a place here to hear. John Cage. Already started on. Mr. Cameron Wolf gave you certainly represents a whole other aspect of his work in his writings, especially in the 50s. And I wish I could discuss it now, but I haven't spent a lot of time preparing. And I just want to move on and finish up my comments since I'm really out of time to run anyway.
Don't think that.
Okay. Now, in the spirit of John Cage's essay, New Music, a Credo, which has been reprinted in most books, it's one of his most famous. It's originally given as a lecture in 1937. I came up with a credo, and I say that quite facetiously. And this is the last page about what I have come to conclude about prepared piano. Some of these I've worded in a very non-Cagean way, and I want to explain them and get to them. I didn't mean to incite any philosophical differences, because these comments are strictly applied to how I accompany a dance class. Okay, as opposed to composing works for prepared piano. I treat them differently because they serve very different roles for me. I'm presently working on a composition for prepared piano, only my second really. And I'm looking forward to doing some very elaborate preparations. And that will take plenty of time to do and will be carefully thought out. Several people in here have commented to me about their own compositions for prepared piano. And everybody knows what I'm talking about. When I'm playing in a dance class, it's a completely different ballgame. All right, my first credo is that there are no rules. And of course rules are how you define the word rule. There are guidelines, hopefully governed by taste and by experience. And you discover things that don't work and things that do work. But I guess the point is there is no right way to prepare a piano. And there is no one school of thought on it. It's just an option we have. So never rule anything out as an object in this room that I could throw into this piano without maybe getting sued for breaking the instrument, as a means of changing the sound of the instrument. Okay? And like I made a comment before, very often when I see a movement, and I will talk about that as well, where I think a prepared piano song might be appropriate, I'm usually unprepared, or I suddenly have to look around for something to put in the piano. Sometimes it's just my hand. And I kind of save myself the bother of improvising with two hands that way. I just put one down. I only can do one thing, so it gets easier. Okay. So that's really all I'm saying is, please don't, and I don't think anybody in this room would ever think this way, to be honest with you. So these comments are for the world at large. From all of you and conversations with you all, you're very open, and it's really wonderful. So it's not addictive to you. It gets old much quicker than you think is something that I do believe in. Okay, you've got this cool sound here. Okay, we've just done several exercises. Now they're going to do some real lyrical, long, for a dodge in a low vocal class when I start going. And then the teacher just kind of turn around. Well, if the teacher doesn't turn around and notices it, then you have a problem with the teacher. And it's just inappropriate. And you have to be careful that you aren't so preoccupied with the cool thing you're doing that you forget that you're a part of the class.
Is it a temporal problem, or is it a technique? Because you could play that.
You can. I think that I don't want to really open that bag of metaphysical argument, which is very valid, and that doesn't mean I'm just being coward. A good musician should be able to take any timbral tools that he has in front of him and turn them into something appropriate for a movement. However, a good musician also recognizes that he has a resource that he could use that would be very appropriate and fun to play. And if it means taking the preparations out of the piano, then he should not rule that out. I think what I'm getting at is sometimes, and I'm speaking from personal experience, I was so preoccupied with the cool stuff I was doing, I forgot where I was. And so related to that, deep preparation, as well as preparation, should take you no longer than 45 seconds, the approximate demonstration time on that. That's just a rule of thumb. If you've woven you know, somebody's sweater in between every single string, and you're not getting any sound whatsoever because you used a sweater, and it's going to take you 20 minutes to get it out, I think you have a problem.
Start singing.
Yeah, start singing, tapping the piano, or suddenly you have a terrible headache and need to leave the world. So that is, number 3 is really in relationship to number 2. Number 4, before you put it into the piano, make sure you can somehow get it out of the piano. And here is a bit of experience I had using, I found a wonderful sound. You take a box of angel hair pasta, dry pasta, you hold the pedal down and you sprinkle it into the strings. It's gorgeous. 3 years ago I did it to piano and I'm still looking at all the angel hair pasta inside. And it still will rattle now and then, and, you know, I'm always in the ballet class where you don't really want it. So again, you know, I guess I'm a little bitter about that whole story. But it was a wonderful sound, and if I had to do it over again, I would get a sampling keyboard and a microphone, and I would sample that sound and always have it on a floppy disk and never ruin anybody else's piano except for the one I did record it.
Doesn't the sharper image show a piano back?
Probably designed to fit in between the strings.
You don't need to take the action out.
But it's great to do that. Okay. I love the idea that my latest trip to the hardware store is now tax deductible. And I also had a good time explaining. You know, the person was kind of, I had such a bizarre assortment of little things that I just picked up that, you know, the person at the register goes, wow, you know, are you working on, you know, building a shelf or something like that? I said, no, I'm good. Oh. And one of the things that John Cage recommends, and there are many schools of different ways of preparation, is items that have resonance of their own, and things that change resonance, things that dampen resonance. One of my favorite things is weather stripping. And I use something like this. The first prepared piano piece I wrote, I was asked to do something that incorporated Indian music. And I didn't know anything about Indian music, except so I went and bought a record. And there was a man doing a rhythmic dictation. And you just drape it across the strings. It's adhesive stuff. It's easy to get off, easy to get in.
So you can use that on an upright too.
Yes, this works on an upright. And you get a wonderful pluck sound. So this is the family of dampening tools. If anybody wants to see some of this stuff, feel free. And I had used a rhythmic raga, which was a 7-beat thing. As an ostinato. Now, this brings up an important point. Placement on the strings is important. I think one of the things that I found most useful in my music education was, of course, on acoustics. And understanding where you put this stuff makes a big difference in the timbre. When you put it close to where the hammer strike at the edge, you get that wonderful pluck sound. I've tried it on this piano, and every piano is different. You need to explore. Sometimes you put it in the middle of the string. It doesn't change it much here, but I've had pianos where it goes completely back.
You may not have time to get into this, but what about on an upright?
On an upright, you need to, I found my best results right at the top,
At the top
of the
rather
bolts.
than underneath?
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely there on the upright. The other point is, my favorite things to use are screws. And screws are very versatile because you need to understand that a string vibrates at its fundamental frequency but also at its upper partials. And the simple math is halfway up the string, you'll get a pitch 1 octave higher. A third of the way up the string, you'll get an octave and a fifth. Fourth of the way, you get 2 octaves. You can get harmonics by simply touching the strings and playing them. But placement of the bolt changes the timbral change in a great way. So really explore, and even holding a note down and sliding the bolt up and down can produce an interesting sound. Be prepared continually for disappointment. I thought this stuff, I'm going to have a field day with it. And no matter what I did to it, putting it on there, short of soaking it wet.
Is that fiberglass?
Yeah, it's fiberglass insulation. I thought, God, this would be great. It made no difference whatsoever with the sound of music. Rather than go through this, I think I'll just finish off this list. The music takes precedence over the sound. That's the controversial comment. I think on its surface, John Cage would really disagree with that. The sound is the source of the music. But this goes back to, if you're preoccupied with the sound and you're supposed to be co-teaching, accompanying, whatever language you want to use. Dance class, sometimes either it's too quiet or you just forget where you are. Okay, so remember that you are creating music and use these sounds appropriately. My best example here is this is a wonderful sound. I have to show you this one. I can find it. Call it big hairy. There it is. This bowl. Now, I might break a string. I don't care. Use a lower. Screws are wonderful because when you screw them into the strings, they stay put. This is a bolt. Sorry, the difference between a bolt and a screw is a tape point. And they're very useful. They're much easier to get in and out of the piano than a bolt is. And a nail doesn't have a groove, so it'll fall in, and then you can't get it out.
Oh, bolt?
Well, it's not working on this piano, which is the other issue. You should get to know the instrument you're on. The piano I prepared this on, I got a pitch that I think is 2 octaves lower. It was very beautiful and deep and resonant, and I thought, maybe it's the bolt itself, but I guess it had to do with the magic of everything.
It is a totally new issue on every piano you take.
Yeah, and the anecdote I have on that is, I was fortunate enough to play at a dance festival last summer, and there was this terrible little Kawai upright that never, ever, it was completely dead, and I've been sitting on it, pounding it, and punching it, and I couldn't get anything out redone in 2 minutes. And so I thought I'd prepare this instrument and maybe get something wonderful out of it. And you were there that day. No matter what I did to it, from spitting into it and the tape and everything, I got the same dull thud.
Which one?
The white Kawai that was in the dance studio that doubles as a dining hall.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
It got sort of this sound, but not even that nearly as interesting. It sounded like somebody was hammering a nail very far away, so it was so diffused.
What size bolts do you recommend using?
See, and now I've been labeled an expert.
Well, what do you use?
I use
Pretty one.
these are 3/4 inch, and the diameter I think was 3/16. I bought a bunch of different sizes. I found the one that fits most suddenly for a lot of vibration. The other point I want to make is that percussion instruments are wonderful ways of preparing the piano, and you get 2 worlds in one. Like this, they're going to throw this poor tambourine out. But I have loved it. All of a sudden you get pitches and you get the rhythm. Anything with a flat surface in a percussion world works wonderfully. A tempo block is a wonderful sound on the piano. That brings up the comment that this is another quote from John Cage, does he? But the pie plate bounced around. If you're in a hurry and you're trying to get something, you need something with weight, where you can put it in the strings and it'll pretty much stay put. I mean, it's exciting that the timbre is going to keep changing because the thing's bouncing around the side. But you may either lose it altogether, or if you find a sound that you really like and you lose it, you can't get it back.
But that was the very first thing he ever tried.
Yeah, that's what, and he says that in his essay. He put a pie plate in there and he got a wonderful sound, and then every time he hit it, it bounced and moved around. And I've had things roll in there, which led me to number 7. If you value your cuticles when you drop that stupid little 3/8 screw between the strings, I use a small magnet attached to a pencil when I use a nail on it. No matter how careful you are, you will still drop it into the strings. And I've ripped the skin off the sides of my fingers more than I care to mention getting that. Number 9 relates back to number 4. Spilled coffee does not affect the piano sound at all, but it certainly affects the way it looks. So be careful with that. And really the discussion that I was hoping to have, and I guess I talk too much, is that a lot of the things I can do in here, I can't do in an upright piano, but that's not the same thing as saying you can't prepare an upright piano. You just have to learn different things. The things that work the best with me, that I've had, have been using this sort of, the weather stripping, dampening sort of material in an upright works well. Also, putting thumbtacks in the hammers. In an upright piano, you can get at the hammers. On a grand piano, you can't. And you get a brittle harpsichord kind of sound. And a lot of times the upright pianos are so sorry that the felt is already solidified into the rock. So, should I just bring it to a close? Okay, this is a very quick discussion about the prepared piano. The comments really have to do with Use your taste and use your judgment, but it can be a lot of fun and it can be very refreshing for everybody involved. But don't get preoccupied with
Well, you might want to share, also for dancers, it's a great way to get them to play the piano without being
Oh.
inhibited.
I think one of those epiphanies, I'll end with this story. That's a good way to end. Recently gave music for dance workshop type class where I talked about John Cage and the Terricciano. And in the course of the lecture, it was even Lisa's fenders. In the course of the lecture, I leaned over to talk, and the thing went snap and hit me in the forehead. And instead of going, oh my God, they said, put it in the piano, put it in the piano. They took my suspenders off and clicked, and I was so pleased because they were that enthusiastic about this whole process. They'd never heard that this could happen. So we put it in the piano. And then I invited the musicians over and had 3 volunteers that had 3 different registers of preparation inside the piano. And we had a movement study going on at the same time, so I had them improvise a rhythmic piece for the movement study because and one person was trying to use her fingers and didn't know it, so I just took her hands and just rolled them up into balls and said, now, just use it this way. But they were able to focus on the rhythm without any fear of the instrument. And it really caught their attention, and it was very interesting to them. So I recommend this as a way of inviting people into the universe of sound and into the possibilities that, we talk so much about the possibilities of something beyond MTV and bad rock radio, but there's also possibilities of execution. They just need to know about it. So I like using prepared piano. It has saved me and at times when I felt completely devoid of ideas. It has allowed me to work better with percussionists, to be a percussionist, which I'm not, but would like to be. And I would love to hear other suggestions and ideas because there's lots of ways to do this, and it's so simple and so beautiful. But thank you very much for your time.